Here is Mr. Alex Ross, whose work has won numerous awards throughout the world and whose paintings hang in many of our foremost museums and galleries. Here in his studio, Mr. Ross will tell us about his philosophy and approach to art as he demonstrates some of the techniques he uses in the watercolor medium.
My work has changed greatly over the years. I've heard it from many people, and one of the things that I've become quite enamored of in recent years is watercolor. I'm known as one of the big brush users. I like big brushes. I think they're great for putting down a statement quickly, and you get a chance to work broad and quickly, and these days I feel like I have to work quickly. I've got a lot of things to say, and this is the quickest way for me to say it. One of my favorite aids is a little hair blower that I keep handy. It just adds to my own particular technique. I do occasional portraits, which require a little more attention to detail. I don't do as many of them as I used to. I tried even in those days to make my things as full of the abstract, give it a great deal of abstract design as much as possible. People often ask me, how do you begin a painting? Well, you know, this is one of the most difficult things for an artist to answer. I find that looking through art books gives me a great deal of inspiration. I particularly love Matisse. I think he's a great colorist. Of course, I'm particularly interested in color, and I begin often by looking into the works of some of our more famous painters and picking up a favorite color scheme. And from that get some inspiration to begin a painting of my own. This is not an easy thing to do all the time, to find inspiration for your work. But what I do is borrow inspiration from the color. Blocking off a picture to work for composition is important. And the color sketches are tremendously important. I know pretty well what I'm going to do before I start my painting. One of the things that I find helpful to me in working is not to overload my palette with paint. And by that I mean I don't have a formal color arrangement. I'm not particularly interested in careful blending. I find that rather dull. I've been all through that. And I'm more interested in the powerful statement. I find that isolating color and letting it stand out by itself means more to me than technical blending and technical tricks. My palette is rather undisciplined at times, I might say. If it just happens that I want a big dab of ultramarine on my palette, I quickly put it down and try to eliminate all disturbing color from the area. I think that I work rather quickly, and I think it's good. Putting your watercolor statements down fast is the proper way to do it. And that's the real beauty of watercolor, to get the real character of it to work for you. I find it important when I'm doing a picture to occasionally introduce a very bright spot of color. This appeals to me. I like to use color as intelligently as I know how. I think color is so beautiful it has to be treated almost like a symphony, but it must be a symphony of harmony. Chaotic color is extremely disturbing to me, and I try to watch that carefully, that this doesn't happen. I also find kind of important to keep changing water, and I usually keep 2 or 3 clean palettes nearby, so that in case I want to quickly change color, I can use it to the best advantage, so that it doesn't become involved with other colors. Of course, when I'm mixing colors, like a blue and a yellow or a blue and a red, naturally we have to have more than the one color on there. Smaller brushes, of course, are also necessary in certain areas, but I find most of the time that I'm working with a big brush. There's a great satisfaction in in seeing your color come to the point where it's just right very quickly without mixing too long, as in oil painting. In a very short space of time, you have arrived at your exact intensity of color. I believe in painting watercolor with a great deal of vitality. My shapes have to be forceful, and I have to find that in my work, and I keep searching for it, and it's tremendously important to me. Composition of abstract is somewhat difficult to explain. It's a sense, a feeling you have for the dramatic, for the play of one strong area against another. But of course, I try to emphasize the abstract qualities of the picture. But I work very high key in most areas, light values. I still want my wallop of color in there. I'm not interested in anymore in precise drawing. I think that's incidental. But I'm trying to make color really dramatic by giving it a stage in which to work, see? And I feel the stage is better if it's light instead of dark, see? Maybe that's what I'm trying to do. I get a lot of inspiration from old photographs. This is a very easy way, I would say, to do a painting. By maybe taking an obvious subject and try to make it maybe unobvious by eliminating the obvious, or at least de-emphasizing the obvious, and placing great emphasis on unimportant detail, such as shadows sometimes, or reflections even, you know. And to me, this kind of does something that takes it away from the ordinary. We're so used to seeing objects that are very familiar to us, and one way to make your painting kind of stand out is to introduce this idea of de-emphasizing the important. I spend a great deal of time on preliminary work, doing pencils, first of all, and when I'm satisfied with my general composition in line, I begin to follow that up by introducing areas of mass. After which, when I'm satisfied with that, I make some color sketches of the whole composition. They, again, are quite rough, very little detail in them, but enough to give me a general idea as to what I want to see in my finished painting. Now, color sketches are very important to me. Well, after making one color sketch, and then another, it becomes increasingly difficult to make your final selection. But the reason for all these color sketches is to be constantly searching for something that's new, hasn't been done before, and is pleasing to your eye, to your color sense. Then I draw on my finished surface very lightly. I don't like the pencil or drawing implement to interfere too strongly with my work. In fact, I put it on just light enough to be able to see it. And from that point on, it just fades into the background with my color over it. One of the important things about watercolor painting is predetermining your actions before. You don't have to worry too much about that in oil painting, but in watercolor, you really do. You have to think it out. Acrylic paints, unlike traditional watercolor paints, have qualities about them that are very interesting, and for most of us, they offer very distinct advantages. Acrylic paint is tremendously exciting to work with. There's qualities about acrylics that traditional watercolor paint does not have, such as you could place a very bright color of deep value. You could start a painting with that, and I often do this. But the point is that you can get some of your very strong passages in first, rather than the way I work when I'm working in traditional watercolor, where you're likely to paint on a heavy passage, and then if you were to go over it with water, it would disturb it. But acrylics dry almost immediately, and this is the great advantage I'm talking about. The reason I sometimes draw with my brush instead of painting, you might say, I'll begin to draw small areas with acrylic, and when that dries, I have the outline of this particular passage nailed down. And that allows me then to sweep large washes without disturbing this acrylic which has dried. I don't always use large brushes. I occasionally use a small brush. And there's reasons for this too. But as I said before, that's not as important as getting your large areas in quickly and with purpose, making a strong statement. I like to work broad and freely. I feel little need to be preoccupied with blending of color. I think that most of the excitement I'm after comes in bold statements that have little to do with pretty blending. I like to use the corner of a brush sometimes because I can quickly, from that corner, go into a large slice. You know, I can just put down a huge stroke. And this is important sometimes. So the very intensity with which you paint sometimes almost demands this kind of an application. Ordinarily, I find it much more advantageous to get down as quickly as possible a feeling of the picture, and that means I work maybe all over it. I rarely just do one small bit and try to finish that off. In fact, I don't even recall ever having done it that way. It's important to me to try to capture the dramatic qualities of the picture as quickly as possible. And of course, this is one of the beautiful things about watercolor. You can do it that way. I like to work my color cleanly as possible. I keep playing with darks against whites, and I study my work from time to time, and I don't think any artist feels that he can completely tackle every part of his painting with complete assurance at every moment. He has to stop and think about it. I find that a hard surface is difficult to work on with watercolor because it won't dry immediately. It doesn't have that absorbent surface that, say, paper does. But I make up for that. I bring out my trusty little hairdryer and go to work on it. Generally, when I'm beginning a painting these days, I like to feel that what I'm doing is not the obvious. In fact, I rather like to de-emphasize the obvious and emphasize the lesser important details. I think in this way I defeat the expectation that everyone has of seeing a very familiar object dramatized and made rather ordinary by this treatment. I feel that what I'm searching for in my work is a kind of a poetic lyricism, you might say, where I operate somewhere between a dreamlike feeling and reality, somewhere between a realism and abstraction. A clean palette is really quite important. I feel that acrylics especially do a pretty messy job on your palette, and if you don't keep it clean, the little particles of paint dry and get in your brush and more or less foul up your washes. So you really have to keep a very clean palette using acrylics. A knife is important for mixing. I often use that, and of course my big brushes are of prime importance to me. I find that when I'm putting in a big juicy wash, I just have to have a big brush, and it would inhibit me to use anything as small as say a number 7 brush, a half-inch brush or something. Using large brushes would have scared me at one time. Now I really enjoy them. I feel that a good-sized paintbrush is absolutely essential to doing a strong watercolor. The resist surface is marvelous for accidental effects. Knowing when to stop is one of the important things about using the resist surface. You can put in a large wash and the resulting effect is always interesting. It's completely different than if you're using paper. When I'm painting, I I kind of keep generally trying to think in an abstract manner. In spite of the fact that my subject matter is representational, I love the feeling that there's abstract forces at work, and I lean very strongly in that direction. Generally speaking, I don't recommend going over a watercolor, but in this case, it's almost necessary to occasionally repeat a stroke. But there's no question about it, you get some marvelous watercolor effects on this particular board. I like to work on a load table and on a flat surface. Then if there's anything important, like I want a color or a wash to run in a certain direction, I just tip my board, hold it up at an angle, and let the water do the work. This is very important in a watercolor, to allow your liquid medium, that's what it really is, to do a lot of your work for you. I have no desire to make a minimal statement where very little is being said. I still like a lot of content in my picture, but I'm very interested in keeping it on the light side. While the paper's still wet, I often introduce some perhaps delicate passages that create interest and variety to the picture. I like to take a common or ordinary subject like boats or any familiar object and try to lose them in what you might call unimportant detail, taking the obvious and making it unobvious, you might say. Or take a shadow, for instance, of an object and make the object itself very unimportant and perhaps make the shadow far more important. In that way, you lead yourself into abstraction where ordinarily you would find it difficult. It's not the easiest thing to try to abstractize, if that's a proper word to use there, realistic objects, but without becoming involved in trickery. In this particular painting, I felt that it was important to choose a couple of small areas and really wallop them with color, give them a powerful shot in the arm, so to speak. And this becomes important by isolating these very bright color spots. If I were to use, for instance, orange, as I'm doing here, spread that color all over, it would lose the dramatic effect that I've attained by isolating it and keeping it in the company of very strong, deep values, such as the dark greens and dark blues around it. I generally reserve any small detail as a kind of the last stage of my painting, because once I see what the general overall dramatic effect is, I feel that I've won my game, so to speak. So any additional small detail is just icing on the cake. I like to work when I'm feeling good, and that wouldn't matter whether it's 5 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock at night. I don't like for me to work under artificial light, and I avoid that as much as possible. I find that, having spent so many years at painting, that I have less desire now to do the very obvious, realistic pieces. There's lots of people who are involved in realism, and I think there's another world beyond that. I think there's a world of, well, you might almost call it mysticism. It's a dreamlike world where we have our dreams, you know, and after all, they're important. And I think that catching some of that is important to me, you know. And there's more to it than that. You know, there is realism, and we have to realize there is, but there's also this dreamlike thing. There's this other world that I think that we can wonder about and think about and even try to paint.